Welcome to the regular board meeting of the Sewer Authority Midcoastside for Monday, November 14th, 2022. Due to the ongoing state of emergency declared by the governor related to preventing the spread of COVID-19 and pursuant to Government Code Section 54953, subsection E, Sewer Authority Midcoastside will be holding this board meeting by Zoom webinar. Access to this meeting will be available to the board and the public. Telephone, audio, at the following number. I believe that's 1-669-900-6833, passcode 35260, meeting ID 838-0773-3795. So could I have a roll call, please?
Director Lohman.
Here.
Director Marsh, who's an alternate for Director Dye.
Here.
Director Clark. Director Clark.
Are you here, Matthew?
Are you muted, Matthew?
No, he's not muted. Maybe he's still, his connection is not very good, probably.
Yeah, he's had trouble with his phone in the past.
Okay, we'll come back to him later. Director Penrose.
Here.
Director Slater Carter.
Present.
Chair Raddock.
Here.
Director Clark, one more try. Well, we can see him. We can't hear him though. There he is. Director Clark, roll call. Okay.
He's here.
Okay.
He's here.
Okay, he's given his attendance by showing up.
Okay. So we have a quorum, and the first item of business is public comment. And do we have any members of the public who would wish to address the board on either the consent items or on items that are not on consent or the regular calendar? It looks like we have Sid Young.
Thank you, Mayor Ruddock. I was just calling in to mention that I did get a call back from Matthew Chichester today, but this kind of affects every sewer district. I noticed that there was one property in Half Moon Bay that changed hands on December 29th of 2020, but they've been delinquent on their sewer bill ever since. And it is owned by the county. It's 230 Cabrillo Highway South. That's the Coast House, formerly Coastside Inn, owned by Keaton Erhan. And the property taxes haven't been paid. The delinquent amount is $56,390.06, plus the upcoming $24,872 of next year's tax bills. So I spoke with I think Barbara Dye and Catherine Slater Carter just prior to the election. And they told me to check with other people about how it's handled. Apparently, each district doesn't get a property tax assessment list of delinquent property tax owners. They just get like a lump sum from the county when they're paid their sewer tax fees. I mean, their sewer fees that are billed on the property taxes. So when a big hotel or any large, even a small person, you don't know when they're behind on their taxes. So I don't know if you guys want to work it out with the county, but it would make sense to me to have a breakdown of each APN number that's being paid when you get your lump sum payments in. So I just wanted to mention that. I guess Matthew's going to reach out to the county to try to get that delinquent sewer bill paid. The only other thing on that tax bill is the mosquito abatement district. So the $56,390 includes penalties and mosquito abatement on the past due, but they don't have any other property taxes anymore, like MROSD or the school district taxes or the community college taxes or the storm fee and stuff. It's only sewer and mosquito abatement, but it's been slipping through the cracks for a while now. So it's getting to be a pretty sizable amount. anyway, I just wanted to bring that to your attention to all the districts that, you guys don't really have a breakdown when you get your big lump sum payments from the county. Thank you.
You're muted, Chair Radack.
Catherine,
Thank you. I wanted to announce that this is the Worldwide Toilet Day celebration. For those of us who care deeply about civilization, which couldn't exist without our infrastructure, particularly our toilets, I can say I'm very pleased that we have indoor plumbing to go along with the toilets. There are still countries in this world where people have to go out in the field and dig a little hole. They don't have indoor toilets or even potties and like outhouses. And so I think we should maybe put this on a social media page if Sam has one, or maybe each of the agencies should. But the history of public health and the ability to have civilizations depends on having this kind of infrastructure. And I was so pleased to hear that it's actually a worldwide holiday and something that is looked at or celebrated instead of a just regional, because again, it's the history, and if folks are interested, there's actually books on the history of toilets. But I will say that after the Revolutionary War, people had their little night buckets kind of things. And the reason women wore boots and hiked their dresses up from being so long as before when they were going out and carried an umbrella is because a common practice was just to pitch the contents of these out the window. So we've made a great deal of progress, and thank you to all the public health folks who care about this on the coast.
thank you. We'll make an exception for potty talk this evening for sure. Matthew.
Following along with what Catherine just said, I'd like to mention a book I read called The Big Necessity, and it is toilets, and it gives some of the history that Catherine just talked about. It's a little bit dated now, but it gives numbers on like the great majority of the over 1 billion people in India apparently still don't have toilets. And they're like, it's an interesting read. The Big Necessity.
Yeah, and a lot of people now are pushing like composting toilets, right? Kind of pushing, that we go back to the sort of old days of, treating our respiratory thingy. So yeah, it's interesting for sure. Anybody else want to talk about toilets? Okay. Any other members of the public who would like to speak? You can raise your hand now. Okay, I think we can move on then to the consent agenda.
Director Radack, there's a hand raised by-
Oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy, go for it.
Yeah, good evening. Can you hear me, folks?
Yes.
Yeah. This is Jimmy Benjamin. I'm speaking to you as an individual, although I am a member of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. Good evening. It's nice to see you all. I did provide a comment letter on an item that's coming up. I'm just not sure if it made it by 7 o'clock. So my reason for commenting during oral communications is just to call attention to that letter. I'll stick around and share my comments if the written letter didn't get out to you with apologies. I'll just read it to you orally. It's a short letter. Thank you very much.
Director Radack, Chair Radack, you're muted.
Oh, yes. Would any members of the board like to make a motion on the consent agenda?
I'd like to pull an item off the consent agenda, please, the minutes of the October 24th meeting.
Okay. Anybody else? So why don't we deal with item 3A first before moving on? Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, the meeting minutes for October 24th on page 6, item number 4, regular business 4C is to discuss and consider adopting the proposed revised purchasing policy. The paragraph following that, starting with the third sentence, which begins, Director Dry had previously requested. I read that sentence about 5-6 times, and it makes no sense. And it's not, in my recollection, it's not at all what happened or what Director Dye brought up. It's too bad that she's not at this meeting tonight, because I wanted to ask if she felt this reflected what she actually said. And then the end of the sentence is a quote from the revised purchasing policy that was going to be added in. That is, the quote is wrong. The quoted part says, general manager shall have authority to procure goods and services by contract is part of an approved budget. And in the section, referenced section of the revised policy, the only sentence that starts with the same 13 words doesn't end that way at all. It says that general manager shall have authority to procure goods and services by contract if the cost for such goods or services is less than $50,000. So obviously that quote is erroneous, and I think the minutes, at least that part of the minutes, have to be rewritten. And it would be good to contact Director Dye and see what she thinks about the previous.
Yeah, I would recommend that we continue the item 3A to the next meeting, and then hopefully Barbara can address it then. Does that work for you, Matthew?
Yes, sure. And then I will move that we approve item B and C on the consent agenda.
Second.
Have a roll call, please.
Director Marsh,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Slater Carter,
Yes.
Chair Ruddock.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so we'll bring that back. Yeah, it's important to get that right, so let's just do it at the next meeting. Okay, we're moving on to item 4, regular business. And the first item is 4A, status update on hydrodynamic flood modeling being done by Integral Consulting, Inc.
Yeah, so on August 22nd of this year, SAM board authorized the general manager to enter into a contract with Integral Consulting to develop a hydrodynamic flood model. And this was necessary as we've discussed in the past that SAM facility is at a risk of periodic flooding due to intermittent storm-related flow within the Pilarcitos Creek and the nearby Kehoe drainage channel. Several studies were done in the past, but then it was decided that we should take the services of Integral Consulting and develop a model and come up with various scenarios of flooding. And therefore, Integral Consulting is right now with us to discuss about it. And we have David Revell and Sam with us. Over to them, and they will give us a brief about what work has been done till now and what they intend moving forward with. Over to you guys, David or Sam.
Hi, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to work for you guys. And Sam and I were talking, and when we went through the approval process, I was really impressed with the questions you all asked. You clearly are interested and understand your system. And so we have been now working for a couple months and have made some really good progress. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's been sort of being the project manager and doing a great job on stuff, and let him give a little presentation. I think he should be able to share his screen, hopefully. And then,
yeah, can you give me access? And I've got a few slides here to hopefully just be a seed for discussion amongst the group. But let's see. Awesome.
Yes, I've given you control.
Yeah.
great. Take her away, Sam.
There we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the progress to date. The first being our site walk and conceptual site model development that we performed in September. We'll then talk a little bit about the data gathering exercises that we've done. There's quite a bit of data to handle to develop this project. And then we'll talk a little about the hydrodynamic model development that's been ongoing. And I want to pause here for a second and highlight a few pictures. These pictures were provided by folks at the facility, and these are really the driving force for why we need to do this study. Here on the bottom left, we have a photo of Pillar Creek and the wetland restoration project done by Caltrans. This is down to the south of the site, south of the facility, and you can see this is during a flooding event in December of 2021. And this is approximately a once in 10-year event based on the data that we've collected from the USGS. And so, this is fairly recent and, is expected to happen again. On the right here, we have some historic photos of, this is around the electrical facilities that are of most risk. And you can see here, this is what we believe is sometime in the mid to late 1980s. And you can see here we have significant flooding around those facilities. So the site walk with Dave and I and another colleague of ours, Matt, went to the site really just to try to understand on the ground level what the site looks like and how things are connected. There were some questions that specifically around Kehoe, the Kehoe waterway, and how that connects to Pillar Creek. So we did a walk around the entire facility just to see how things look, what the vegetation looks like, and what's going on. And so here on the left, you see Kehoe waterway. It's heavily vegetated with some areas of openness. There was some standing water, but nothing moving through the system at the time. And that, I guess if you move down to the bottom right of the screen, this is where Kehoe waterway ends. And it ends in this low-lying area with no clear connection to Pillar Creek. And that became, that was one big question that we had, is how does the water from Kehoe get to Pillar and where might it be going? That lack of direct connection might be a contributing factor to some of the seepage that we're seeing at that low-lying corner of the facility. And then in the top right here, we have a suspended drift log above Pillar Creek. So this, you can see the water in Pillar Creek below. But that log we believe was deposited there possibly during that the 2021 December event. And that's about 8 feet above the floor of the creek there. So a pretty significant amount of water moving through the system. The other thing that we noticed is that there was a consistent low flow through Pillar Creek, but that there was no standing water in the lagoon, suggesting that the flow rate within the creek was equal to the seepage that was moving out through the beach dunes. So it was just an interesting observation that we had about the site. So this all leads into helping us develop a conceptual site model and identifying which key features around the site are potentially impacted and things we need to make sure that we are taking account of in our modeling and in our study. So here we have the site in the center of the image here. And then there's two key waterways that run by the site, as you know, Pillarcitos Creek starts in the south and moves north along the facility, and then Kehoe Waterway here, moving from Highway 1 towards the beach. So these are our two main sources of inputs for the model. So we've done a lot of digging to make sure that we have as much data as possible from those. So the USGS provides data right at Pillarcitos Creek where it meets the highway. And then we have a few studies we have one key study that's been done looking at the watershed around Kehoe Waterway and how much discharge is going into there at any given storm event. And so those are going to be the basis for what's providing the water into the system that could be producing the flooding. As we move towards the beach, Pillarcitos Creek obviously moves into a lagoon, and that lagoon can migrate. And the outlet for that lagoon can migrate depending on how much flow it is and the status of the beach. And so what you'll see later on is our model makes sure to capture the possible extents of that lagoon area all the way up to Frenchman's Creek at the north. As we move out, we also have the beach. The beach we believe is going to be a key component to this analysis. As we move forward, as we get sea level rise, possibly reductions in long-short sediment transport, increasing beach erosion, we expect the potential for the migration of that lagoon mouth to move closer and closer to, one possibility is that outflow location could move closer and closer to the facility. So it's just something that we're taking into consideration. So here's
Sam,
yeah.
Can I just go back one quick thing? I just wanted to add one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the system is really dominated by the creek flows and the Kehoe waterway sort of seepage. Over time, I think it's going to become more and more driven by sea level rise and some of the bottom boundary conditions, or as the dunes erode right near the end of that pedestrian bridge that everybody uses on the California Coastal Trail. I think we're going to start capturing that flow. The outlet's going to be kind of where that arrow is and the likely future outlet condition. And at that point, because that's so much closer to the SAM facility, I think that the sea level rise and coastal wave run up and some of the coastal processes will play a larger role in the future that might affect some of the future flooding. And that's something that we're going to get into with this, but conceptually, that's sort of how we think the system will function. And the modeling over the next few months will sort of show what kind of role that might play. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So here's an aerial view of the facility, and we brought this in partially to hoping to give you guys a small bit of homework and just making sure that we've identified all of the features correctly on this. So after the meeting, I'll send out this deck of slides here, and I'm hoping that somebody can make sure that we've identified all the key features here. One thing that you'll notice is that we have a few arrows here of stormwater flow, and so our working theory is that this corner of the facility at the top right being the lowest lying area within the facility, and this is where we see the most flooding, and it's also near some of our most vulnerable facilities. This is how we believe the water is potentially moving through the system right now as it comes into the facility from outside sources. So maybe just to give as a gut check for people that are working at the facility, if this makes sense to you based on what you guys have seen, and just to make sure that we have all these facilities and features identified correctly. We do have a few key outfalls here that allow for drainage out into Pillarcitos Creek through the berm. And so making sure that these are in the right approximate locations would also be helpful.
Yeah, that's, do you want me to weigh in on this now, or are you going to come to the plant and I can point things out?
You can weigh on it now. I can send you the slide and you can mark it up and tell us if it, what we need to change. And so maybe that might be the most effective, just to make sure we've got it in writing and it's, it's permanent, if that works for you.
Yeah, because none of the drains there's no drains go out past the berm to the creek. That's not something that happens. All the drains within the plant go to the headworks and go through the process. Most of the water and the flooding that you saw earlier in the earlier pictures from the late 80s, early 90s, those were because the influent wet well couldn't keep up and everything flooded. That's what the majority of that flooding was, flooding across from the wet well all the way across that office area, the electrical to the effluent building. That was from the influent wet well overflowing.
Tim, that's great input. And what I would suggest is we'll send you this and you can mark it up. And then it may make sense for us to come back out, especially once we get the model kind of tuned to the calibration events that we have, particularly that December storm last year. And then maybe we can walk through it and we'll have a much better understanding of what the model's saying, and you can tell us what you've observed. And that's where we're really going to make sure that we've got it right.
There's nothing marked wet well on this whole diagram either, by the way.
The headworks is the wet well area.
So these features were taken from a very old CAD drawing that was, basically just a Xerox copy back, not necessarily the actual CAD drawings. So we've done our best to kind of translate the old design plans that are not digital information to this. And that's part of what your homework is, to make sure we're getting this right so we can report it back appropriately.
I just wanted to reiterate that none of the runoff from the plant runs into the creek. I think that's an important takeaway for all of the participants tonight. The crew and the design of the plant is to prevent that. But I am curious about that Caltrans wetland note under the label secondary clarifiers. It's something I'd like to find out more about later. So in any event, thank you for that. And Tim, thank you for making it really clear that none of our water flows into any waters of the state or the federal government.
Understood. And so that Caltrans wetland feature is a restoration project developed by Caltrans. And that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later on. It was in that first photo that we talked about as an area that was had filled with water during that December storm. So we'll see that again. So with that, so we've gathered quite a bit of data that's publicly available and from other reports. The biggest data set is the Pillar-Tudas discharge from the USGS gauge. That goes back on daily average values back to 1965, I believe, somewhere in the 1960s. And so we have a large amount of data that we can then use to estimate what a typical or what a series of return storm periods might be. So what's a 1 in 10 year storm, or every 10 years, what's a 1 in 100 year storm? So that's what we started to gather, and that will be the basis for our inputs for the Pillar-Tudas Creek when we're looking at different flooding events. The other one that we have is this Kehoe waterway discharge estimates, and this is based on Schaff and Wheeler report from 2015. They did a summary of the watershed, the potential inflows from each of the watersheds and the regions around Kehoe, and came up with multiple return periods as well for that. So we can use that to scale our inputs into Kehoe and Pillar-Tudas, and those two being our major inputs into the system. The other piece of this is that, as Dave mentioned, the wave and coastal side, we've been gathering data and refining a few empirical models to look at dune erosion. And so we have the USGS Cosmos model, which is a series of a data set that can be used to look at beach evolution. We also have time series of total water levels, which is wave run up and tides. So as you get a storm event, that imparts an extra amount of water on top of the tides. So that's going to be an important process to make sure the model captures. We have beach topography from various historic time periods that we can look at the evolution of those dunes and the beach profiles. We're in the process of revising a dune erosion model, like I said, that uses the FEMA guidance and looks at storm duration as well as a key input parameter. And then we have historic trends, meaning sediment budget, changes in sea level rise that we can incorporate the estimates that are as we move forward. And then what does a 1 in 100 year storm event look like? And what is the erosion that could possibly be imparted due to that storm? And here I just have a picture of a big wave from Mavericks, which is local, maybe not what would be at the site, but is a key feature in this process is how the waves are going to be affecting the beaches as we progress. So the model that we've developed is using DFlow FM. It's an unstructured grid numerical hydrodynamic model. But here what you see is the extents on the upland side. So everything from the beach up, everything that's colored here is the model extent. So we've really just tried to focus in on the areas where Pillar, Cedos, and Kehoe can come in. We tried to exclude any of the areas that we've already captured in that Kehoe waterway assessment report from Wheeler and Sharp. And so we're really just focused on the potential floodplains for those two waterways, as well as the facility here in the center. The model also does extend out all the way into the ocean so that we can capture the changes in tides and water levels due to storm events. But the most important, the nice thing about this model that we've used is that we can vary the resolution in areas of interest. So out in the ocean where things are changing spatially very much, we have a resolution of 50 meters, and we work our way down to the facility, where the facility is represented by grid cells of 1.5 meters, so about 5 feet, which gives us a lot of ability to represent the changes in topography around the site, around the berm, and throughout the waterways, Kehoe specifically, and then within Pillar Cedos, we have around a 3 meter resolution. So, and we feel that this gives us a good ability to represent the site and the changes in the site that are going on. So we've done one initial test of the model. So we inputted a discharge event. We tried to model this December 13th and 14th time period. You can see here that this is the USGS gauge discharge over time up on the top right. So the peak discharge was in the afternoon or evening of the 13th. And so the model then takes that data and allows the water to go where it needs to as it's introduced into the river. And you see here that it has extended all the way out to the beach. It's connecting to the beach and even up into the lagoon area up to Frenchman's. And if we go one more slide, you can see here as a focus, what we're looking for right now in just this initial test is to see, are we capturing what we think is happening during this event? We know, for example, that this area near the wetlands area, this wetlands restoration project from Caltrans, this was flooded. You can see here that we have water in and around that area. We see this horse trail that connects to Pillar Cedos Creek. It's also inundated with water. It should be noted that this model does not include anything in Kehoe. This was just our first test to see what the model is doing. So we're still iterating on this, but these are all good signs for us to say that the model is behaving appropriately and can then be refined and tuned to get us to the next step and be able to incorporate more complexity and more inputs. So overall, I think this is a good sign that the model's behaving appropriately.
Sam, can you go back one slide, please?
Yeah.
I just want to point out two slides, I'm sorry. So this variable grid size allows us to really focus on the areas of interest. So clearly the plant itself, we're at a very high resolution, so we can get into the details of flooding at, each door. As we go away from the facility, it broadens, but in the Caltrans wetlands or in the channel itself, we're at a resolution where we'll be able to see, are we seeing high water marks of 8 feet where we saw the drift logs stuck in the tree, and the high water marks that we saw in the field. So, and then as we get out into places, into the ocean, obviously, but I just wanted to point out that the reason we have this nested grid was to be able to capture the details we're interested in, as well as the information that we have to help us calibrate and verify the model quality. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
You were 3 slides ahead.
Yeah. So I guess the final thing we want to just touch on is the next steps. So we're going to continue to do model refinements, and that includes adding things like variable vegetation and roughness, including this additional discharges in Kehoe, and incorporating those boundary conditions of the ocean. That'll happen over the next 2 months. We start getting into holiday times, and that makes things a little bit difficult, but we have a good handle on how to progress with that task. We'll also be developing inputs for a few other cases of interest, the 1980s storms, and then the 100-year discharge event that will be a sort of our basis for what we might consider designing against or producing for assessing against. We'll be continuing to do model evaluation over the next few months, and then we'll also be looking at how to incorporate that berm evolution model over time as well. And with that, I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and happy to field any questions that folks might have.
And I just want to add one other quick thing, is that in between sort of improving the model and adding additional calibration events, we're going to be developing a series of scenarios with sea level rise and storm frequency recurrences that, once the model's a little bit better tuned, we've added in Kehoe waterway discharge into the model, then we'll bring back these scenarios for consideration, and we'll want to get your sort of buy-in and approval on those final set of model runs. And that will also inform the berm evolution model, which is the dune erosion model. And then we'll go and do sort of final model runs and be able to share what those vulnerabilities and flood depths look like before we get into adaptation.
Great, thank you. I think I'll start with questions from board members. So, and then I'll move into the public questions. So who on the board would like to ask questions of our integral consultants? Anyone? Catherine, you had your hands raised earlier.
Thank you. I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing. I came across an old disc that I've got to drop off for Cushion, but it has some, it was done by a local fellow, Keith Mangold, who has done an awful lot of work on learning about the historic patterns for Pillarcitos Creek. And so I'm looking forward to dropping it off, and it's not nearly as detailed as what you're doing, except there is one photo or map that shows the lagoon that used to be at the end of Pillarcitos Creek. And I know he's been talking about it for a very long time, about reestablishing that. I am also glad to see that Caltrans has established a reparation or something like that wetland, because it tells us exactly how low that is. And it would be interesting in what's coming up to see more of the elevation lines from USGS. And my last comment is, I think Balance Hydrologics out of Berkeley has a gauge on Pillarcitos Creek, and you might want to check with Mark Weishner.
Those are all great comments. I'm trying to, I would love to respond a little bit. First of all, any historic photos that you or others may have, either of storm events or Pillarcitos Lagoon. We have been looking at the Resource Conservation District report and using some of that information in this to inform Pillarcitos. The site visit basically told me that when the flow in the creek is below 3 CFS, all of that's seeping through the beach. So we're not getting that perched lagoon habitat. And I was trying to scribble. The second one you said was, so the first was Pillarcitos Creek. The third was Balance. Got a great working relationship with Balance. So if they have a gauge on there right now functioning, that would be great, because for like, say, the September storm event, we could see how that affected the system as well. And then your second point, I'm sorry, I was trying to scribble notes. And
that's okay. It'll turn up if it's relevant.
Okay.
Other directors. Okay, so I have a question about, are you going to be addressing rising groundwater? You know, a lot of the stuff I've been seeing about San Francisco Bay is that, you know, the groundwater over on the peninsula is going to rise first before we actually see, you know, the impacts of waves, you know, overtopping the shoreline area. Are we looking at potential impacts of groundwater, which to me, you know, are relevant to the location of our electrical system, you know, which is sort of below grade. So I'm just wondering how we're dealing with the issue of groundwater. Are we modeling that? And if we're not, I think we might.
So, Debbie, that's a great question. It's the groundwater issue at first, I thought we would be really looking at. And that's one of the reasons why we spend as much time as we did looking at Pillarcitos Creek Lagoon. It's an interesting system because in a lot of the other bar-built estuary systems that I work, the controlling elevation of the groundwater is largely the closed summer lagoon condition. That's not here. The flow and the run out all the way up to Frenchman's, or at least far down the beach, there's enough seepage that it can handle 3 CFS. So we're not getting this perched summer lagoon. What to me was most interesting was that there was no clear channel between Kehoe Waterway and Pillarcitos Creek. And so we've been corresponding with Kishan about trying to have people at the plant look at the seepage in some of those low-lying buildings to see if they notice any increase. I think that one of the adaptation strategies for right now, I think if there's anything affecting groundwater, it's in today's situation, is that there's no clear-cut drainage to Pillarcitos Creek. If there was a clear-cut drainage, then that seepage zone would probably dewater faster and there'd be less seepage, is my working hypothesis. The groundwater aquifers that could have saltwater intrusion and things are very shallow up there. So we're not getting, and they're perched. A lot of the ag wells and the ag, are basically shallow perched aquifers. They're not necessarily being intruded by sea level rise. So I don't see groundwater per se as a major contributor to the flooding here. I see the seepage, sort of the containment zone in what we've called the Kehoe seepage zone, because it's not a clear pathway. And I want to differentiate that from San Francisco Bay, where the tidal influence and the groundwater is going to become more and more emergent over time, because a lot of them are very, muds or sands and very permeable. So we're going to see that much more. I'm not seeing a clear groundwater signal in this area.
It's good to know. Thank
But
you for that.
I'm glad you're thinking about that, because on the other side of the peninsula, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay. If there aren't others with questions, I'm going to move to and start with Jimmy Benjamin.
Yeah, I put myself on video. Can you see and hear me now? Thank you and good evening again. So I provided a short letter to Keishan right at 7 o'clock. I apologize for not getting it out earlier. But I did want to comment on the presentation. I heard it was very interesting. I should just preface this for those of you who don't know me. I am the neighbor immediately to the north of the sand plant. So in those pictures that were in the slide projection, I'm the guy in that little house on the recurve of the watercourse. I've spent a lot of time studying that watercourse because of some unpermitted development that took place there some years ago, and have actually hired a geomorphologist as part of preparing a geologic report that is needed to understand some of the effects of that development. And I want to be sure that we are not reinventing any wheels. We may have some information that is helpful for you. The analysis of the Kehoe watercourse is, I would be careful about relying on a lot of those earlier studies, because they do have some garbage in, garbage out problems. The LIDAR data, not very good in some places, unreasonable Manning's N coefficients that assume that the stream would constantly be cleared, when in fact it's a habitat that's growing. Yeah. There's clear evidence of erosion. We had a surveyor occupy the same place that Kira, the surveyor that Shack and Wheeler used. And we've noticed that there is sedimentation occurring in the bottom of the Kehoe watercourse near the sand plant. So we've seen about a half a foot since I believe it was 2015 that they did their study. And that analysis is going to be part of a larger report that I'm sharing with the city. We're cooperating to try to make the coastal development permit right. And we want to be sure that you guys have the benefit of that information. I know a lot about the Caltrans mitigation wetland. Any of you that want to know about it, come over, we'll pop a bottle of wine. I can tell you all about it. Similarly, the Kehoe watercourse actually started as a zeroth order headwaters, essentially. It has a history that goes back as far as 1861 in maps. The channel that was built on top of it is opened a much larger area, a watershed to that area than it would ever naturally have been. It would have been about 40, maybe 30 or 40 acres. Now it's over 500 acres. So really, really big impact. And my biggest concern, in addition to making sure that you have the right data so that you don't rely on these studies as though they're gospel when they're actually very questionable, is to be sure that we're understanding and we're considering the changing land uses in the area, that we have a clear understanding of the digital elevation and digital terrain models, so that if you're doing, models of how that's going to change over time, you know what the sediment loads are and how they're changing. We do anticipate in our current local coastal program that the areas that you're describing actually might be candidates for reducing the flow. The entrained flows in that area are really a significant disturbance. So we hope that there'll be opportunities in the future to make changes in that. Just as an illustration, there's a culvert that drains the southern portion of the Casa del Mar neighborhood, the neighborhood that I live in, that's just north of you. If I recall correctly, that was barely even considered in the Schaff and Wheeler study. And obviously that's a very flashy flow, so it's significant. Geomorphology can't be seen without an understanding of the habitat in that area. As you probably know, it's habitat for listed species under the Endangered Species and the California Endangered Species Act. But the big story is that if we don't think about it at a watershed level, if we just look at the reach next to the sand plant, whether it's the Pilacitos Creek or it's the Kehoe watercourse, we're going to have unrealistic boundary conditions that we won't be able to do a good job of understanding. And so I want to be a resource for you, and I want you to be a resource for us as we work through getting the right information, because I think we all want a sustainable, reliable plant. It's expensive for it to fail for you. It's catastrophic if it fails for me. So thank you for letting me speak at length. I hope that my comments, my written comments, Keishan, can make it to the board members. And I'm happy to share the data I have. That's a standing offer that I've already made to the council, and I'm happy to make it to you as well. I think that I believe I saw Maz was on the call as well, and he is well aware of the concerns. You're welcome to speak with him. You're also welcome to speak with my geomorphologist. So thank you very much. I'll just say, to repeat what I said earlier in the meeting, I am a member of the Half Moon Bay City's Planning Commission, but I'm speaking to you tonight strictly, solely as an individual. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jimmy.
I'd like to just comment quickly on that. He mentioned a few things that, well, first of all, thank you. That helps, just to understand that there are, to reinforce that we understand that this is a complex system. So some things that we're doing to make sure we're addressing those. Specifically, you talked about land use. One thing that we're still developing is a variable land or description of each of the different parcels. And you mentioned Manning's N coefficients or these roughness coefficients, developing a good understanding of that variation throughout the system, because that is a huge component of how things are going to move. And if an area is easier to move through than it is in reality, that's going to change how the water and the flooding might occur. So it's something that we're very much aware of, and we are working to address. And your point about boundary conditions is well noted. We can certainly look into what you're talking about and think about how we can address those as maybe not as a single input, but as a variable input, different, as you said, peaky or flashy. We can think about how to address those as well. So no, but those are very good points for us to make sure that we're addressing as we move forward.
Let me know how I can help.
Yeah, and I would just add one more piece on that, is that the Caltrans wetlands of specific interest, because I know the city's also looking at that as a potential stormwater detention basin of sorts. We are in contact with Caltrans to get the as-built design so that we can start to do what your geomorphologist is doing, looking at how that initial wetland construction may have performed and changed over time based on the topo data that we have. So we'll be looking at that. In terms of what would be the most useful for the work that you're doing that would help us, would be that we're relying a lot on the Schaff and Wheeler report for recurrence interval discharges from the Kehoe. And so we have that. Sam showed that in one of the slides. If there's some changes in that based on this peakiness or flashiness that you're talking about, that would be really helpful to have as we're starting to integrate the Kehoe flows into the model development. And we can also just do it as a sensitivity, maybe plus or minus 25%, and adjust the timing a little bit. So we can certainly take that at qualitative level, but if your geomorphologist, whoever you're working with, is getting to a quantitative level, we can certainly start to, put some better constraints around that.
Yeah,
So,
you may know him. His name is Martin Terceau. He's one of the geomorphologists from Dietrich's group at Berkeley.
I definitely know Brian.
So, Bill Dietrich. I'll just say in passing, or to develop this, and I don't know if it's in a dialogue is in order in your meetings. I don't know your custom, so cut me off, please, Debbie, when it's appropriate. But a good example of the kind of concerns I would have about that is the coefficient. So the study was really oriented toward whether there would be flooding, whether there would be an overbank discharge. And the conclusion of the study was that it wasn't. I think that was the desired conclusion. It was a very different city council, probably different political motivations than we have today. But the analysis assumed a very smooth flow because the channel, it was existing conditions and the channel had just had significant vegetative removals. That area won't be subject to those vegetative removals in the future. And so as it grows back, you'd expect a much higher roughness coefficient, much rougher channel there. There's also quite a bit of sedimentation in some of the culverts in that area. There are some portions of the original watershed in the 1978 study that disappeared in this study. Some of them may be appropriate, some of them maybe not so appropriate. So a careful look at all of those, I think, is relevant. And the answer to your question of whether it's quantitative is absolutely quantitative. And the 2010 study of the potential for restoring the what do you call it? The Pillarcitos Lagoon. I'm really glad you got a hold of that. It is quite interesting. I can save you a lot of time in your conversations with Caltrans. I have the original staff reports from 1996 for that. I doubt that you'll get them from Caltrans in a timely fashion. So maybe better just to get it from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
You bet.
Okay, Sid.
Hi. I hope Jimmy's still on because part of this he might know the answer to. But in the slide that's called conceptual site model, I think you stated, it's not written on here, that the Kehoe waterway, or otherwise known as the water course, starts at Highway 1, but then I saw on your conceptual site model slide that it across the highway, there's two big fields on either side of, I think it's the Grandview neighborhood, and that's called the Kehoe drainage area. I know one of them is Beechwood, and I think the other is a field owned by some farmers, or is currently being farmed. It seems as though there must be a way that water from those two vacant lot areas is coming across the highway and going into the Kehoe watercourse. But I don't know specifically where it is, or I'm just guessing. And then the other thing is, during the December storm, I kind of recall that there was possibly the storm waters came way up hill, or east of the plant, as far back as I know. Carter Park had some flooding, and I think maybe Highway 1 got a lot of flooding from across the road where the uphill, I guess you call it a garbage dump. I don't know the right name for it, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think that there was some flooding then in like mid-December from those areas that eventually came down to the SAM plant. So, that might have just been a one-off. I don't know. But Jimmy would probably be able to tell you if the water course called the Kehoe water course starts at Highway 1. I don't think it does. But anyway, that's just one thing I wanted to mention. And thank you for looking into this, because I was pretty concerned about all the flooding near the SAM plant myself. Thank you.
Yeah, that is through the chair, that's a textbook example of an erroneous boundary assumption. The Kehoe, the headwaters of that watershed are up in the hills well to the east of the city. They actually begin east of the city limits. There's a substantial impoundment above the Grandview neighborhood. It was originally the subject, the area that was going to be built by Dykstra Ranch that eventually became Pacific Ridge. And that area is part of the water that feeds into the Kehoe watercourse. It runs around to the south of the Grandview neighborhood. And Sid is correct that the undeveloped land to the north of Grandview is also part of that watershed. It was another erroneous assessment in the 2015 study that you are nominally relying on to say that that was not part of the watershed. I questioned the engineer about it at the time, and I was told that they couldn't find the connection, so there must not be one. My geomorphologist walked the area, and Martin's conclusion was that in a big storm, that area is going to dump water. There's a slight rise as you go to the south along Highway 1 on the east side. But in a big storm, or if the city's project to put in a path for a multimodal transportation corridor on the east side of Highway 1, if that's below grade, if it changes the elevation, it could create a real change in the contributions to that during some of the heavier storm events. It wouldn't have to be a 500-year storm. It could be a 20-year storm or a 50-year. We don't know the exact number yet. But yeah, we have a lot of bets. And again, I'm only too happy to discuss this when I'm not boring, taking valuable time from this board.
Yeah, so Jimmy, I would just say, share with us what you have. It sounds like it will be useful, and we certainly want to consider it. We're also aware that the passing of Pilarcitos under Highway 1, it had backwaters at a certain at a certain flood level or flood stage, but the gauge we're using is below the culvert, so any Caltrans bridge replacements may affect those flows. But please send us what you have. We are relying on that Schaff and Wheeler report from 2015, which considers a lot of what the last commenter had. But if there's better numbers that we can use, we certainly would like to use the best ones.
Thank you. Greg.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Benjamin's comments there. He's covered all the data issues I could ever hope to. So those questions have been raised. And I also appreciate your comment, Dr. Rebel, about the sensitivity analysis sort of bound or help us gauge the level of risk we might face. But I wrote Sam back on August 22nd with a possibly related issue, and maybe this gets back to the possibility of backwater. What happened on that storm was that the plant exceeded its theoretical inflow capacity of 15 million gallons per day. And the intertie pipeline system that springs the water from the north only contributed a little over 3 million gallons a day of that per Sam's records. And in fact, the pipe has a theoretical maximum capacity of only 4 million. So that leaves over 11 or 12 million gallons. Where did it come from? And John Dowdy of Half Moon Bay had his engineer conduct a study that showed that they could not have contributed more than 7 million gallons a day from the Half Moon Bay sewer collection system. So we're left with 5 million gallons of inflow that, while it didn't appear to come directly from the creek overflowing into the plant property, it was enough of an emergency that the plant had to put a special pump on the property just to bail out the electrical building before it flooded and cycle the effluent back into the plant, sort of hold on to it. So I'm not sure whether your study is going to cover where did all that excess infiltration come from? But it sure would be nice if you could at least rule out. If you could say, no, that could not have come from Pilositas Creek, no backwater, whatever, then that will at least help us narrow in where we start looking in the collection systems to find that 5 million gallons or more peak flow that again threaten the electrical building. So I'm hoping you will at least be able to rule out, if not rule in, because you find something. So that's my comment. That's a vulnerability we've already experienced and just barely dodged, rather than shorting out the entire electrical. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I think it's there is a little bit of mixing of apples and oranges with us looking at really the surface flow and runoff, but I do think that we can inform that question based on sort of flood volumes that we're going to be modeling as to whether we can account for some of that. And Sam may have some other aspects since he's in the weeds on the modeling, and I just wave my arms and say that looks good to me. But I think that, you know, that's a very valid point that you raised this in the sort of the approval hearing, and you know, we're not able to look at the entire SAM facility and collection system as this, but there's definitely the surface water component we'll have a great handle on.
Okay. Any other comments from staff or the consultant? Very interesting. Looking forward to more data. Thanks for the preliminary.
Yeah, I would imagine, you know, late February, early March, we'll have another round of updates that would be meaningful after we've calibrated stuff. Especially if we get some stuff from Jimmy, sounds like it might be really useful. And we'll have the coastal modeling moved far along at that point too. So we'll have another chance. And in the meantime, I see that somebody sent pictures flooding, I guess this is upstream, but if there's any other pictures of historic flood events, especially with dates, down in this lower reach, that would be really valuable for us to help calibrate the model.
Good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you in 2023.
Yeah. Have a good holiday season, everyone.
Yeah, same to you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Item B is discuss director for each day of service and provide direction to staff and set a public hearing for December 12th, 2022, following notice provided for Government Code 6066.
So this item was discussed at the Board Operations Committee meeting, and the committee recommended that we bring it to the board, and therefore this is being brought to the board today. Just to give you a heads up on what's been happening, the present day compensation is $100 for the directors for the meetings that they attend, and it's for a maximum of, I believe it's a limit of 6 per month. Now, this was a resolution was adopted on August 23rd, 2004 for SAM directors to be paid $100 for each day of service, not to exceed 6 days of service in any calendar month. And since 2004, there have been no increases in director compensation. Although, as per the government code, water code, the increase may not exceed an amount equal to 5% for each calendar year following the operative date of last adjustment. That's what the code reads. There has been no increase since 2004. And therefore, it has been brought to the board right now to take a decision whether the compensation could be increased from $100 to $190. Jeremy, would you like to add something more to it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Good evening, board members. We have to have a public hearing. There has to be newspaper notice that has to happen. So tonight, the only thing the board's being asked to do is just simply set the public hearing. I do need to make a couple of there's a kind of a draft public hearing notice. I want to, assuming the board approves the next item on the agenda, which is a board policy on eligibility for compensation. We'll probably need to tweak the notice a little bit, but I can work with Kishan on that. The board doesn't need to take any action on that. The only thing that needs to happen tonight is to just set the public hearing. And of course, each of the board members after the public hearing is free to vote however you wish at the next board meeting when it's actually teed up for decision.
This came as a recommendation from the Board Ops Committee.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so did any of the member agencies discuss this at any of their meetings?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, so questions for staff before we seek public comment.
I was searching for my unmute button. Montera is also discussing increasing our compensation for board members. Ours has been $75 a meeting since the mid-90s. And if you look at what's happened with inflation, it doesn't even buy lunch at a taqueria for two people.
Yes, the job certainly, it would be responsible to increase the pay based on the work, for sure.
And I will add that the Harbor District Board gets $600 a month flat fee, whether there's one meeting or 6 or 8 meetings. You just get it's like you're being on call. And that's been the Harbor District fee for probably 20 years too.
Well, thank you for that, Catherine.
I have just a question about the recommendation of the fee from the Operations Committee. Because it looks like just simply took the 5% times 18 to get to 190, but the wording seems to allow 5% per calendar year. So if you compounded that 5% year on year for those, 18 years, you would get something more like 250 or so. So I just, I wondered if that difference was discussed, and Jeremy, if I have that right, that you could raise it 5% for each calendar year in a compounded fashion.
You can, well, the answer, you raise a great question, Director Marsh, and that's one that's, I had to have a nice dialogue with some of my partners about that issue, because from time to time, that question does get raised. Is it just a straight 5% per year, or is it compound? And the consensus among the attorneys who I work with was that it's strictly a 5% per year. It's not compounded. And I think the plain language is, it's probably capable of different interpretations, but that is the interpretation that I think most people use. Okay.
In a number of those years, inflation was 0. So it probably evens out. And my other question is I already knew the Harbor District pay, but just wondered if there were any other types of similar committees that were benchmarked. I don't know who's on the Operations Committee, so I don't know who to ask.
On to that.
Dr. Slater-Carter, it looks like you're muted.
But my mouth's moving. Okay, thank you. MWSD did do that research, and you can get it from Keishan, you can get it from Clemens. I would like to see a clause added to what we're doing and say that the board compensation needs to go up 5% either every year or every even numbered year, that comes out to 2.5% a year, which keeps it on average slightly below inflation. And that way we can keep things more up to date.
It would give you the compounding effect without having to go more than 5%.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I could just respond to that really quickly, that's a great suggestion. Unfortunately, it does require action. You can't automatically include it for future increases. So, but what you can do is you can just set it up so that every year, every 2 years, you can direct, as part of the resolution, you can direct the general manager to come back in 2 years to have the board consider another potential increase. So you could do that, but you can't have an automatic adjustment, unfortunately.
So in Half Moon Bay, we can only increase council salaries in January following a general election. That's what the government code, how the government code regulates city council member pay. So, and then we can only do it 2%.
So that comes out to just about what I was suggesting is 5% every other year.
Yeah, if you set up just this resolution so it included reviewing the director compensation every other year after a general election, you would have the opportunity every 2 years to move it as much as 5%. Right?
Good point.
Yeah.
And that's not unusual either. That's pretty common. I'll also say that from what I've seen, now this is more in Southern California, but the range is between $200 and $300 per diem. So 190 is actually on the low side of what I see.
Indeed. So this is just a discussion. It looks like there's no action required on this item.
There actually is. So there was 2 recommendations. One was the first one, direct staff to prepare a written policy. Well, we already did that, so you don't have to direct them to do that. But what we do need is direct staff to publish a notice of public hearing for the December 12th board meeting.
Would someone like to make a motion?
So would that be just a clarifying question for December 12th, go with the 190, but in that resolution, you could have the every 2 years do a review, or 2 years from now do a review.
The motion could give that direction.
Yeah.
Sure.
So moved.
Good. I'll second.
All right, can we have a roll call, please?
Director Marsh,
Aye.
Director Lohman. You're muted, Director Lohman. Director Lohman.
He's trying.
It's trying, I know.
Please working on it.
We're working on it.
Was a thumbs up. Will that work?
Thumbs up. Yeah, just do that.
Okay, I'll take it as a yes. Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Slater Carter,
Yes.
Chair Raddock.
Yes.
Very good.
All right, item C, adopt resolution 4-2022, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Sewer Authority Midcoastside, establishing a policy and procedures for director compensation.
Yep, I believe we've already discussed that in the previous item, and we would make the necessary changes in the resolution.
Yeah, maybe Kishan, can I just provide a little bit more detail on that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the way that the pertinent statutes read is right now, without a policy, director compensation would be limited to board meetings and then some training or conferences. And in talking to the operations committee, it seemed the way you can potentially, the way that a agency can potentially pay per diem for other director activities that are undertaken on behalf of the agency, you have to have a policy to identify what types of activities are eligible. So that's what we did, and it did seem to make sense to the operations committee and staff that, you know, if a director does, for example, you know, attends a meeting on behalf of SAM at the request of either the board president or the general manager, or otherwise undertakes other activities that you know take a reasonable amount of time, the policy should allow for compensation for that. And so that's what we tried to do. I took I kind of cribbed from two other agencies that I knew had policies. And so that's what you see in the draft policy. And so it just allows eligibility for additional compensation besides board meetings and training.
Sounds good. Nancy, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just it's a comment and a question for Jeremy. First, after the first whereas, you have government code twice, so you just have a typo there.
Okay, well, happy to remove one of those.
Good
And
catch.
I just had a question about on section 1B. I was surprised, and maybe because it's just my ignorance, that ad hoc committees are included, because are those considered official?
Well, that's a great question. I think the answer to that would be, while they're not required to be open to the public, an ad hoc committee is not required to be noticed. It's not required to have some of the procedural requirements of the Brown Act, but still takes time, still takes preparation, still being undertaken on behalf of the agency. So most agencies I know are willing to pay for ad hoc committee meetings, but it's really up to the board as to whether you want to include that. But to me, it made sense to include those.
No, as somebody who's on an ad hoc committee and spends a lot of time on it, I appreciate that. But I just, it was more of a legal interpretation question. Is that considered performance of official duties? I suppose if the board sanctions an ad hoc committee, then it is.
Yes, I would say it's performance of official duties.
Okay, thanks.
Catherine.
I just wanted to say, up until recently, there really wasn't much committee activity at SAM, and it has become a more integral part of the function of SAM with Beverly and particularly with Keishan. And so I think having the committees in there makes a big difference, because you're right, it does take a lot of time, and we do a fair amount of decision-making to help keep our meetings more on point. And I'll be quiet because I notice it's 8:24.
Thank you. Rick?
I would personally be in favor of compensating everybody for all the work they've done.
I would agree with that. Matthew?
I'd just like to weigh in and say that I think that the language in the resolution as written that does considerably broaden the cases in which compensation would be allowed. I'm very happy with it.
Okay.
So maximum 6 times a month, which is no change.
Yeah, that's statutory, so you can't really get around that.
Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? I'm seeing none. So a motion to adopt resolution 4-2022.
So moved.
I'll take that from okay, Nancy first and then Deborah. And could we have a roll call, please?
Director Marsh,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Slater Carter,
Yes.
Chair Roddick.
Yes. Motion carries.
Motion carries. Yep.
Item 5, General Manager's Report for October.
Yeah, we would normally give the detailed manager's report in the second meeting of the month. But we were ready and we thought we should do it this meeting because we were not sure whether we'll have the second meeting as it is after the Thanksgiving. So since we were ready with all the data, we've attached it. And staff is here to answer any questions. But before we get there, I wanted to also inform the board that an item was discussed in the board operations committee about high-risk substance analysis. You know that we all know that Sam had started off the COVID testing and implant, and BioBot Incorporated, the agency, which was in East Coast, was the first one to start it. And Sam had contracted with them, and we were doing the analysis for COVID. Now, BioBot reached out to us and said that they would like to do high-risk substance analysis. And that is basically analyzing for fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and nicotine. And basically, the samples will be sent out once every week. And at the start, they would like to create a baseline within a period of 3 months, and then compare it with the baseline. And then we would know whether there has been an overdose or what's going on. And so we just sent out the samples last week after we discussed it at the board operations committee that we should move forward with it. So it's just the beginning. I haven't received any results. We would get results only at the end of the month. So I'm not sure as to how we would get the results, but once the first of the results come, I will bring it back to the board and share it with the board during the first meeting in December. I just wanted to inform the board about it. Now, regarding the manager's report or any other thing, if staff is here to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Okay.
Seeing none, I think we're good to move on. Item 6, Attorney's Report.
Okay, yes, thank you. I will be very brief because I know we're getting a little bit late here. So AB 2449 is the legislation regarding the Brown Act that was just passed in the last session that you know, it's kind of with an eye towards the expiration of existing authorities for having remote board meetings. So I'm just going to go through kind of what's changed. The pre-COVID normal rules are, if you want to have, you're already, even before AB 361 and the governor's executive order that preceded it, you could already have teleconferencing, and it wasn't too bad. Just required a couple different things in order to be able to do it. And this is the kind of the old rules are now coming back as of February when the governor's emergency declaration expires. So it requires the posting of an agenda at a remote location. Majority of the directors have to be within the agency. At each remote location, you have to post an agenda. And the biggest one is that the public gets to attend in person at all noticed locations. So that means that if you're at home in your bedroom, in theory, the public is to join you to do the meeting, which people don't like. So that's one of the, I guess, the downsides of the old rules. So AB 361 came in, as you all know, and we've been doing that now for quite some time. And in order to continue to do AB 361 virtual meetings like we're doing right now, there has to be a declared state of emergency, and local or state officials have to recommend continued social distancing. And so the state or local officials, I think that usually you can make a case, you can find somewhere where there's been recommendations for social distancing, so you can normally overcome that hurdle, but the state of emergency is going away in February. So after that, absent something else, you're probably going back in person. So that's where AB 2449 enters in. And so it does provide some additional flexibility. I'm just going to go very briefly. it's actually in some ways a little bit more stringent if you want to take advantage of it. It does provide some flexibility, and I'll say where it maybe helps a little bit is in the context of if someone is very sick and can't attend, there's an opportunity for dispensation for emergency circumstances, or for example, you can't make it because your car breaks down and you need to do it, the meeting from the side of the road, that could be considered just cause. So anyway, in order to be able to take advantage of this new authority, at least a quorum of the members of the legislative body have to be at a singular location, clearly identified on the agenda, open to the public, and within the service area of the agency. So that's actually more stringent than pre-COVID rules, because for the old rules, teleconferencing, as long as a majority have to be doing it within the service area of the agency, but everybody can be on the teleconference. So if you're going to go under the new authority, it's actually more stringent. There has to be the ability to participate via Zoom or other two-way platform with the ability to observe and hear the meeting by the public, and the public must be advised on how they may comment on the agenda. This is similar to AB 361. If you lose connectivity or if the public is unable to participate, you can't take any action. So that's similar under this new authority. And for directors that want to participate remotely under this new authority, they must be able to demonstrate just cause for the absence no more than 2 times per year, or demonstrate that remote participation is required by emergency circumstances, and that requires a vote of the legislative body to approve. And you must disclose, if you are participating remotely under this new authority, you must disclose the presence of any person over 18 in the same room or location with you. And it can't be used more than 3 consecutive months or 20% of the total meetings of the agency per year. So there's a lot there. It's pretty, and I've talked to other general counsel types, they've been like, well, not sure it does a whole lot of favors for us. But I think what it does do is on occasions where something comes up and you just can't make it and you still want to participate, it may provide a vehicle for you to do that, assuming your fellow board members are inclined to approve emergency circumstances. So with that, I'll take any questions, but that's the newest authority.
Any
Yes.
questions?
Yeah, Jeremy. Is the public still allowed access to you
No.
if you are remote?
Yeah, so that is the one advantage in that if you comply, you either have you're able to show just cause or emergency circumstances, and you comply with the statute. The public is not required. You're not required to make your remote location available to the public, and so that is something that could be important. For example, if someone was ill. So there are circumstances where that might be useful.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Jeremy, could you put this in sort of a chart-like form?
Sure.
I don't see that for Sam, it makes that much of a difference because every agency that's involved here, we each have an alternate.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a key difference between SAM and other types of agencies where you simply have 5 board members. So I think you're right. Yeah, but yeah, I'm happy to put something together. So just kind of quick and dirty.
Kind of
summary.
before and after.
Yep, happy to do it.
That would be great. Thanks.
In fact, I suspect I can probably crib some from one of my partners. That's because a couple of them have put those together. So I'm happy to do it.
Terrific.
Got the file in the drawer. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move along. Does anybody have any directors or topics for future board considerations? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move us to item 9, which is convene in closed session.
Okay.
So those of you who will not be attending closed session will go now. We'll say goodnight to you.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to leave in just a second here. It looks like Christopher is here. I don't have anything that we need to talk about on item 9A, so it's just 9B. Should I excuse myself at this time?
I think that's probably a good idea.
Okay.
Who's in on the 5-4